since Skidmore was in Saratoga Springs and there were no men's colleges, so if girls wanted to have a date, on Saturday night, a wonderful tradition is that girls went down to the lobby of their dorm and guys would come from either Rutgers or Dartmouth or something, and they would just stand there and pick who they wanted. And these girls thought that was a good idea. So you don't know what you missed.
So when the change that took place in feminist consciousness, I'm really impressed that you were already a feminist, but in end of sophomore year, advising me, she said, well, you know, you could take my class next year on the history of women, and I have the chutzpah to say, and I tell my students this, I think I want to study real history. Sophomore year. Okay, 68 happens. I come back, or it was my junior year, after 60 or whatever, I come back senior year and I say, can I take that class? Anyway, she wasn't offering it, but I got to write about Emma Goldman in her class. So that change happened in feminist consciousness.
Yes.
I was a geology major, and when I graduated, you had to have onboard testosterone generators to be considered a geologist. And I went to UC Berkeley for graduate school, but my graduate advisor was Swiss German and believed all women should be honing the kids. I left without a graduate degree, but I worked for a while at Lawrence Berkeley Lab on a geothermal energy project, and we were going out into the desert outside of Winnemucca, Nevada, and doing experiments. And I'm a vegetarian, have been since 1970, so trying to find vegetarian food in Winnemucca in the mid-70s, not happening. Salad bar, that's it. So I needed a place where I could cook. And they had rented a whole house for the technical crew. And I wanted to stay there, and for a while I did. But one of the guys at LBL, who was in charge of supplies and so forth and so on, he took me aside one day to the side of the drafting room, which was a very large room with a lot of drafting tables and no walls. And you could probably hear him here without benefit of telephone. He had a foghorn kind of voice. He told me he didn't want me to stay at the crew house. I said, well, why? I need someplace where I can cook. Oh, well, no, I just don't want you. Finally, he said, well, what happens if you get pregnant? He'd assumed that I was going to be sleeping with all the guys.
That's a male point of view.
Well, one of the crews was a good group of guys, and the other one I never went out with. But the one group I told them, and they burst out laughing and said, well, it's not going to happen, but if it were to happen, we just chip in for an abortion. So, sexual harassment, oh God.
Conferencing with my Latin professor, Lydia Lenahan, and as we sat, she was at her desk and I was at a chair, and on the floor in the little carrier was her baby, and I never forgot that.
They were my first role models of women who had careers and were alive, and so Sue Larson was one of them, and Mary Motorsill. So I wanted to say something to them. In fact, I think they actually did have a rather profound effect on my life going forward.
I never assumed that women weren't allowed in the workplace because my parents were both immigrants, and my mother worked along with my father every day and raised us and did all the stuff, that needed to be done. And at a very young age, I started helping out and helping her. And I assumed that all women could work and have a family at the same time because my mother did it. Why couldn't I?
And now we're going to turn to what we did next.
Okay, so we're calling this basically what we did after. And I think of this as showing ways in which we were influenced by the events of our time and how we used them to fashion our lives so that our experiences then ended up influencing and affecting other people that we worked with. And we have some stories, and I'd like to ask Nancy Bieberman and Laura Adler-Gibner, Estelle Friedman, and Daphne Fodor-Phillipson to please come up and tell their stories. Go ahead.
So I learned during college that buildings and property gave or took away dignity and power. Buildings actually became my career. After earning a law degree, I went a fellowship to Columbia's School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation for a year, and learned about real estate finance, zoning and land use planning, and feminist architectural and social history, which was foundational for everything that came next. In 1992, I founded an organization, the Women's Housing and Economic Development Corporation. WEDCO built and operates now close to 3 major housing complexes in the Bronx with soon to be 500 apartments. We've got healthcare, commercial kitchen that's a business incubator, Head Start. We help small businesses in the neighborhood, and we do after-school programs. One of our buildings, and again, this was because I worked in the Bronx for 30 years. You know, the Bronx has been the home to a lot of toxins in the soil and air, and I had the opportunity to develop an environmentally sustainable, affordable housing development with green roofs, solar panels, non-toxic building materials. Today we have a staff of over 350 people, and we serve in one way, shape, or form 40,000 people a year.
Bravo.
Okay, Laura Adler-Gibner. Besides my professional work, I've worked as a volunteer in parents' associations and my neighborhood association. Results have included grants to support music and art programs for students, as well as a neighborhood newsletter and listserv that keep homeowners informed about issues and achievements. Volunteer work has meant being connected with others in positive and friendly ways for common purposes.
After Barnard, I stayed in New York for a while. I worked and then I went to Columbia Graduate School. And in the early 70s, I was becoming an ardent feminist and soon a lesbian. I focused my graduate studies on the emerging field of women's history, writing first about women's prison reform in books called Their Sisters Keepers and Maternal Justice, later about the history of sexuality and history of sexual violence. I lived to see significant, though insufficient, change towards diversifying academia, helping to create what is now the Stanford Program in Feminist Gender and Sexuality Studies has been a joy.
Anybody here live in Plimpton? Yes. Yeah. Senior year, I was elected chairperson of the revolutionary government at Plimpton Hall on the slate of a group called Daughters of the Columbia Revolution. We fought parietal rules by staging a sleep-in, and political life finally brought me community in Barnard. In 1970, I answered the siren call of revolution. Along with some Columbia grads, I began working in factories, a bookbindery, a meatpacking plant, a glass bottle factory, to organize workers for better wages and working conditions and for socialism. As you may have noticed, the revolution not only was not televised, but did not take place. But after working in these factories and on the assembly line at a General Motors plant for 10 years, I finally learned how to organize. By that time, we had 2 children, and all the heavy manufacturing plants in Los Angeles had closed. Now I work with the West Los Angeles chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. We're working to curb global warming by promoting bipartisan carbon pricing legislation. H.R. 763 is now in Congress, sponsored by a Republican and a Democrat. It will rapidly cut greenhouse gas emissions while promoting innovation and job creation. And Citizens Climate Lobby is a grassroots group with chapters in almost every congressional district, so it's still the power of the people that hopefully will do something about global warming.
For years when I was living with my family in Westchester, my husband and I observed people picketing a private abortion clinic in Dobbs Ferry every Saturday. So we and 5 other people decided to, on our own, without any organization, just as individuals, to counter picket. And we did this every Saturday for 10 years. Then when I retired, and I've got stories, but it would take too long, you cannot believe, they just don't stand there. They were awful to these people. I can tell you offline, they were awful. Then when I retired, I worked, served as a board member of the local Planned Parenthood affiliate in Westchester. I worked with healthcare organizations, and I worked with the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. I lobbied for them in Washington and in Albany, and worked on numerous campaigns for candidates who supported reproductive rights, as well as various legislation. Recently, my most memorable and satisfying campaign was working with Andrea Stewart-Cousins, the current New York State Senate Majority Leader, from the day she decided to run for the Senate in 2004. My wonderful poodle Jack and I campaigned at train stations and shopping centers with her. She has a photo of him in her office in Albany. And finally, after lobbying since 2006 for passage of the New York State Reproductive Health Act, we saw it passed in January of this year, and it was an incredibly moving moment for me.
As an attorney at the National Labor Relations Board, I enforce employee rights to bargain collectively for fair pay and for safe and dignified working conditions. It was all about making individual people's lives better through collective power. I did a lot at the NLRB. I loved that career. And there are tons of stories and cases we won. But instead of going through a whole resume of that, I'm just going to tell you one story. A case came to me on appeal after a regional office had refused to go to trial on it because they thought they couldn't prove the fraud that this case involved. But I thought we could. I was at headquarters. And I said that I would love to try this case. The general counsel at the time had said, some of these headquarters lawyers ought to know what it's like to try a case. So I said I would love to try it. And I got sent out to Milwaukee to second chair this 8-week trial. And we won, but it took a long time. So this case that almost didn't happen ended up making new law about due process and won $22 million in back pay for all the workers that were involved. That was the largest back pay award at that time in the agency for workers. Full disclosure, I am not counting the football players award because they made a lot more money than these factory workers in Wisconsin. But really, in a totally unheard of move, I mean, like this never happens. When the guys who made the outboard motors had a victory party, they invited us, my co-counsel and me, and they made nice speeches about us. But that wasn't the best part. When I saw the worried, desperate people that I had interviewed years before, looking relaxed and happy and able to buy new cars and send their kids to college, I felt pride and joy and awe. And we had fought for 10 years and we had won. And for this second exception. We are not going to break into small groups. And after all, we're all good friends now, right? So we're just going to ask people to share their experiences about what they did after. And we've been able to do good things and good things for the world and for people.
Sometimes people feel like, oh, mine isn't as dramatic and, earth-shaking as maybe some of those.
There's a hypothesis here that we're trying to prove. The hypothesis is that this era that we lived through, many, if not all of us, came out of it thinking and realizing that we could use our lives to do good in the world. And so maybe there's some people here who feel like that's what they did, and you can share with us the form that it took.
Which is, I think, part of what I took away that I didn't think at the time when the Columbia strike began, was I was against the war, and I was against racism. That isn't what didn't lead me to go into the buildings. I wasn't sure that it made sense to fight that at Columbia. I had been part of larger marches, but I didn't see the point of working right where I was working. I think that's what, for me, was the most important message. Later on, I heard people very often talk about think globally, but act locally. And for me, that was an important piece to take away from 1968. Anyone else have any thoughts? What we thought we'd do at the very end here is talk about what we think, some of what we learned in that time of turmoil has to teach us for now. Another very difficult time in many ways. We wanted to sort of open up the floor. We didn't pick out any snippets. That's really not what people were writing in the book. But we hope that people would have thoughts about what they learned when they were here at Barnard for now, for our current time. Hope some people, I saw head shaking, some people who might be willing to say something.
Where are the student protesters today?
They're mired in debt and they don't dare do anything.
They're in Barnard, they're in high school.
In high school, that's right.
Yeah,
High school,
yeah,
yes.
the kids are against the guns,
The kids
and
from-
the ones who
yeah,
are calling
Barnard.
Barnard.
Well, and there are students. I mean, I have, living in New York, I have seen very few protesters, relatively few protesters, but after Trump was elected, I saw lots of college kids. Kids from here, kids from CUNY, kids from NYU. I mean, kids are out on the street more than they had been, I think, for a long time. And I've been on the street, which I hadn't been. I had every once in a while. I was in a demonstration, but I must have been in at least 10 over the last 2 years. I mean, people have different takes on this and different things to do. Despite not being at all sure it's doing much, I sign petitions constantly. I mean, I don't know how other people are reacting and whether or not what happened before. I mean, there's one thing that says, having been associated around Columbia for a long time, sometimes it seems that the one thing that very clearly came away from '68 is faculty has a little more power. There was a faculty senate that there hadn't been before. And the day before election day is now a day off because we won it, so we could be involved in political activities. I don't think the current students know that that's the reason they have that day off before election day.
I have a couple of takeaways. Two takeaways that I have in reflecting on that time and what's happening today. First of all, we lived through a pretty tumultuous time for quite a few years during our college years, before and after. So that gives me this little snippet of optimism that maybe we can live through another horrible time and come out the other side. And the other takeaway for me is it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work to turn around, a country, and we have to be persistent. That's the '68 sit-in was just like a small amount of time, but it was a combination of a lot of stuff that went before and a lot of stuff that went after to really make the kinds of changes that people were seeking. So those are two takeaways that I, from my experience, that keep me going, both in, that just keep me going, like getting out of bed in the morning, and also trying to do whatever I can to change our situation.
An important thing that's happening is the climate change and global warming. I'm just worried that, some states are doing individual things, but from my perspective, unless this really is a global undertaking, we can't say one country is going to do this and another one isn't, but another one is, so, whatever. If it's not a global undertaking, some things, like, you can't come back from. You can stop a war and then rebuild the country that you bombed after or something, but this is so significant, and I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but I think this is really, really critical. And you can call your people and everything, but I'll just tell you a funny thing, that the day after the inauguration, I got this email from the White House, and it told me all the things that the resident was going to be doing that day and how wonderful. So, I had this email, so I scrolled down because I figured there'd be something that says unsubscribe, because I certainly didn't want to get that. So, sure, there was an unsubscribe, but it also, next to it, said contact the White House. So every single day since Inauguration Day, I get his email, except on Sunday, and I write, I contact. Now, obviously, he's not reading it, and I don't know what they think. But I also approach it. I've decided not to be, my instinct is to call him a maniac and stuff. But what I do is I approach it this way. If it's a climate thing that he's talking about, I say, it's my understanding, sir, that you are a grandfather. Don't you care about the climate and the planet, and what are you doing? And I approach it on things like that. But that, to me, as I said, I'm afraid that I disagree that we can change some things, because this is a scary thing as far as I'm concerned.
I spend a lot of time working on climate change. And another thing that a lot of people have said to me that I experienced too was what radicalized them and what they were really shocked about was the New York Times reporting things, and we knew we'd been involved, that they were different. And I think that the media right now are reporting only the despairing, depressing things, because as a retired journalist, I know that when it leads, it leads. They like to write about conflict. But as an activist, I see things changing when it comes to climate change. Republicans who are now testifying on subcommittees whose districts have been flooded or whatever are now, they're no longer deniers, or they're no longer afraid to say what they really believe, that climate change is real and that it's human caused. The bill that I mentioned has not only Republican and Democrat co-authors, but it has 45 co-sponsors, which is a large number for a bill that hasn't been around all that long. And so I see causes for optimism. I think that things can change rapidly. Look what happened with gay marriage. You often start in doing something and it looks like all is lost, and then you go along gradually and work, and then they flip. And I think this can happen with climate change, but I also think that our representatives do listen to us. They do want to be reelected, and that the more of us that get active and tell them we want you to do a bipartisan carbon fee, which is what this bill is, in which all 98% of economists, left, right, and center, say that a carbon fee will bring down emissions. Figure out how you're going to weigh in with your congressperson. A phone call is really listened to, I can tell you, as a personal letter. So I think we can do it, but I think that it depends on the people.
Speaking as a constitutional law person, we need to make sure that we do have a peaceful transition of power in 2020. Because if we don't, none of those other things will happen.
I am totally appalled with all of these school killings, that it seems to be students
who will become the leaders of the movement, and where are we and the rest of adults to protect the next generations?
Gun violence is also one of these causes right now. Again, I'm a Chicagoan, so I'm in a city where this is on the rise, but there is a national organization called Moms Demand Action. It is the adults, even though it is working with, for example, kids from Stoneman Douglas, which happens to be 7 miles from my house in Florida, and I do know people who were personally affected by this. But the best thing that we can do if we want to see change in ways that, without impeachment and so on, get out and vote.
Yes, yes.
Do what is necessary to take the actions that are going to cause change. We're Barnard women, we're bright, we're powerful. We need to go out and show people what we can do.
I think the most important thing we can do in our communities is register people to vote.
Absolutely.
Not just get out to vote, but register them. And the laws are sometimes set up to impede that, so you have to sort of know what your local laws are about voter registration and figure out how to get people to vote who will support this kind of change.
So to echo what Daphne Phillipson already said, I also believe global warming is the single biggest threat to our grandchildren's future. They really will have no future if we don't deal with this effectively. And every time I hear climate change, I cringe, because climate change is a result of global warming. Global warming is the problem. I think it's a Republican strategy to call it climate change. Let's call it global warming.
Voters. We've gone to Rikers and organized prisoners who haven't been convicted of anything who can vote. We've been to North Carolina and organizing people who've been disenfranchised. And it really does make a difference.
And among other things, we have gone up to Hartford and lobbied directly to the staff of Blumenthal, and obviously, they're on the good side, but also to our state senator and representative who are Republican. And I've been working on a rapid response thing by Twitter, Facebook, Twitter to Facebook, on notice, and they've passed a ghost gun thing, a bump stock thing, have just passed in Connecticut. So, it's been ground root stuff, and we're also having what are called house parties, since we can't knock on doors in Heritage Village, for Democrats who voted did not vote in the last midterm, and in the last local election, but voted in the midterms. And we are going out, inviting them and trying to teach them about the value and what local politicians do and how that affects their lives.
Thank you.